All right, guys, starting a little early today. Welcome in to the Notre Dame Stanford postgame show. As always, I'm your host, Nathan Urbach, here with you here every week. Notre Dame game's just ending right now, putting on the finishing touches against Stanford, 45-14. Obviously, over the last few weeks, haven't necessarily played the best opponents, but I think the biggest thing for Notre Dame here over, like I said, the last several weeks has been the dominance that they've shown against some of these teams. It started with Navy when they won 34-6, didn't allow a touchdown. Took that into the Virginia game, won 28-3. Obviously without their quarterback, but still one of the most potent offenses in college football this year. Again, didn't allow a touchdown in that game. And then last week against Georgia Tech, 55-0. Obviously, again, not allowing a touchdown. And then today against Stanford, allowed one touchdown on a short field and then another one against another, a really good tight end overall. But just a really good showing overall for Notre Dame over the last few weeks. And don't want to bore you guys too much with Notre Dame Stanford talk. I know most of you are here to probably to listen to some college football playoff talk. And I know some of you are wondering what's going on. If you're not aware of the way these shows work, I'm on a Notre Dame live stream, and I'm also on the main live stream. So you can kind of check this out, or you can check out another channel's live stream, or obviously not tune in if you don't want to. So, but again, we're going to talk a little bit or mostly about probably the college football playoff today or tonight, I should say. Like I mentioned, most of you don't want to listen to Notre Dame Stanford post-game talk because they took care of business. So obviously a lot of stuff has gone down over the last several weeks, and we can probably start if you back up a few weeks. Michigan State beats Michigan. Chaos kind of goes in, and then Michigan a few weeks after that ends up, skipping over Michigan State, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then obviously, today beating Ohio State, that's going to obviously, put them in the playoff, assuming they beat Iowa next week in the championship game. But, you still have a lot to go. Oregon loses to Utah last week. That eliminates them from the playoff berth. Ohio State, I think, is essentially eliminated from playoff berth unless something crazy happens with their loss today against Michigan. And then, next week you have Alabama and Georgia. That's a big one for Notre Dame fans. Obviously, in this chat, Notre Dame fans need Georgia to win that game if they want to have a chance. Obviously, unless Cincinnati were to lose a game against Houston next week, or again if Michigan were to lose to Iowa, and so on and so forth. So there are definitely some scenarios. That don't necessarily involve Georgia winning, but I think that's the most important. And then, as we're all here watching the remaining seconds of the Oklahoma State game, I would say as a Notre Dame fan and a Notre Dame analyst, Oklahoma winning this game is really important because then they play again next week, and hopefully Oklahoma State's able to get their revenge. But right now with 54 seconds remaining in this game, it's not really looking too hot. So you're looking at Oklahoma State and Baylor next week with the hope that Baylor's able to beat Oklahoma State. So, and again, I know Droop75, you've mentioned this a few times. This is a Notre Dame live stream. It's also on the Voice of College Football, or Mark Rogers' main channel. There are going to be other teams broadcast that are posted as well. And then I'm sure Mark will come on here at some point on his own and do something for you guys tonight as well. But if you don't want to tune in right now, you can either turn this off or go to another stream. But certainly bring those questions. I'm happy to answer anything regarding the college football playoff, overall. But again, talking a little Notre Dame for the football playoff, just in general, just like I said, this is a Notre Dame live stream, but. Johnny Bays, like you're here every week. Appreciate you, man, coming on. And again, if you guys are coming in right now, like I said, this is the Notre Dame Stanford postgame show at the Voice of College Football. I'm Nathan Erbach. I'm here with you guys most weeks, unless I'm at a Notre Dame game like it was last week, which was nice to finally get to over the last few years. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a lot of craziness this year. And I think the biggest thing is there's not really, outside of Georgia, there's not really a team that's dominated. I mean, obviously Georgia has been really good from start to finish this year, starting with their dominating defensive performance week 1 against Clemson. But, the reason you're seeing a team like Cincinnati, who's a group of 5, while, albeit they're undefeated, they've played a decent schedule, or at least a better schedule than maybe they have in years past, obviously beating Notre Dame, beating Indiana. So a couple Power 5 teams in their non-conference schedule. But I think the most important thing for them making the college football playoff this year is you've seen Alabama possibly lose 2 games. Right now they've lost 1. Have struggled against some teams too, obviously against LSU, struggled today against Auburn. Probably should have lost that game if Auburn's running back doesn't run out of bounds. Struggled against Florida early on in the season, which looked like a good team at first, but obviously we've seen that they're, essentially a 500 team. I think exactly a 500 team after their win today, maybe 7-5. I forget exactly, but yeah, I think that's the reason you're seeing Cincinnati involved this year more so. And then with that said, everybody's pretty much more involved. Right now you're seeing 1 loss or possibly 2 loss Big 12 right now sort of involved. You're seeing, Michigan with a loss against Michigan State, but obviously beating Ohio State involved for the first time. I think Michigan's actually making their first conference championship in their history, which is kind of mind-boggling when you really think about it. It's just a lot of interesting things. You're probably not going to get 2 SEC teams this year unless Alabama is able to pull off the upset next week against Georgia. I guess I wouldn't put it past them, but with the way Georgia's playing, it would still be, I guess, somewhat of a surprise, at least to myself. It looks like some of you are commenting right now that Oklahoma State ended up winning. So that does confirm that I think Oklahoma State's going to end up playing Baylor next week instead of a rematch against Oklahoma. So if you're a Notre Dame fan in this chat, you're definitely rooting for Baylor because that would make it to where both Baylor and Oklahoma State have 2 losses. And Notre Dame would likely sneak in at that point, again, assuming Georgia takes care of business against Alabama. So, Tony, thanks for coming in here. I would say I would absolutely say that. A Notre Dame Cincinnati rematch would be fun for a couple of reasons. Obviously, you want to get your revenge against a team like that. With the way Notre Dame's playing right now, I think they are a better team than Cincinnati. They've shown since their bye week, essentially, that they're a really good team overall, much better offensively specifically. The defense, even without Kyle Hamilton, has showed out over the last 4 or 5 weeks, and a rematch would be fun. Another reason the rematch would be fun is that, let's just say it ends up being Georgia, Michigan, Cincinnati, and then Notre Dame is the 4 seed. Then it would obviously be a championship game if they were able to somehow beat Georgia and Cincinnati beats Michigan. Not saying that's likely, but just throwing out some scenarios here for you guys, so don't jump down my throat or anything. But then there would be sort of like a, I guess there'd sort of be an FU moment to the committee that was saying, not only is Cincinnati not worthy, but because Notre Dame lost to Cincinnati, they weren't worthy either. And then they both end up somehow making the championship game. So doubt the committee would make a rematch for them to start the college football playoff. They would probably want that to be a championship game if it did happen. I know they try to avoid rematches as much as possible, but then again, at the same time, if they think Michigan's a better team than Cincinnati, they probably should put them as the 2 seed and Cincinnati as a 3 seed and then go from there. And same with Notre Dame. And we saw, a few weeks back that Michigan was able to jump Michigan State even after losing to them a week prior. So if the committee, for whatever reason, feels like Notre Dame is a better team than Cincinnati, not saying they should jump them because that's not really my opinion on how the college football playoff should work. I think wins matter more than your eye test, for example, specifically if you're looking at the bigger picture, and a lot of these teams are very close in terms of just talent level and everything like that. So I would keep Cincinnati ahead of Notre Dame, but it wouldn't shock me if Cincinnati struggled against Houston or something like that. Albeit Houston being a good team, I completely understand that. But let's just say it's a nail biter, goes into overtime with Notre Dame taking care of business the last few weeks like they have. It wouldn't completely shock me if they gave Cincinnati, Georgia to quote unquote prove themselves. And then Notre Dame and Michigan being, a top-notch rivalry in college football that hasn't played over the last couple of years, give them that first one as well. So who knows in that regard, but again, guys, keep those comments coming. Johnny Bays again. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that'd be a win-win scenario. And I think I tweeted out earlier today, and this is when I thought Alabama was going to end up losing to Auburn. If Alabama lost to Auburn and then lost to Georgia next week, Michigan loses the Big Ten championship and Cincinnati loses to Houston, like what would you do with the college football playoff? And obviously that scenario is still, somewhat relevant. I mean, obviously Alabama's only going to get to 2 losses possibly if they do lose. But it would certainly be interesting if all that chaos happened, because you'd be looking at probably Notre Dame and Georgia for sure. If Oklahoma State wins next week, you're probably looking at Oklahoma State in there as well. And then if Alabama keeps it close with Georgia, maybe you're looking at Alabama. This is the scenario where I think Ohio State could possibly get back into the swing of things, because they have looked very, very good overall outside of today. And obviously their loss against Oregon early on in the season. So, and then of course, I mean, you're not going to put Cincinnati in with 1 loss. UCF didn't make it a few years back when they went undefeated. So if Houston beats Cincinnati, I think that kind of ends their hopes. So you're probably looking at, like I said, Oklahoma State, making the championship. Maybe if Baylor routes them, maybe you see Baylor in that kind of scenario, making the college football playoff as well. So that would certainly be some interesting scenarios if the chaos ensued next week. And for, as a Notre Dame fan, and like I said, Notre Dame analyst, I think that's what I'm rooting for, because that's the best case scenario for Notre Dame overall. And Johnny, I know you're kind of one of the only ones providing some questions right now. So again, I appreciate you for coming on. I'm going to go as long as possible with you guys today, but like I said, not too much to talk about with the Notre Dame Stanford game. It is what it is. Notre Dame took care of business the last several weeks, and so on and so forth. They're kind of just hoping for the best at this point, overall. So to answer your question, I mean, yeah, if Alabama would have lost today, then certainly Notre Dame probably would have been in that 4 spot going into today, or going into Tuesday's rankings. But I think you're probably looking at 5. Everybody kind of just moving up 1. Maybe Michigan jumps Cincinnati. I wouldn't 100% be surprised by that. Obviously the committee has shown that they will jump teams, and Michigan arguably has the best win of the season now. So if they were the 2 seed over Cincinnati, that wouldn't surprise me overall. So thanks for joining in, D-Rock. Yeah, no, it should be fun. Like I said, I mean, it certainly is. It's frustrating to be sitting at home and you can't really do anything about it. I mean, that's the life of being independent and not being in a conference. And I certainly support Notre Dame in that regard. That's probably an argument for another day. Now that I brought that on, I'm sure there will be some comments flowing in, but again, it's also nice to be at home and see that you can probably, just root for the chaos and know that your team can't really do anything else to prove themselves, and hope for the best going on. But, and again, like I know some of you are talking about Michigan number 2. I'm not saying I disagree. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, maybe you wait just to see if Michigan beats Iowa, because then again, it's the same thing. And then you can jump them in, and if they lose, and it doesn't matter, they're going to be out. So it's one of those things where this week for Michigan being number 2, it probably doesn't really matter. I think they will be number 2 if they win in the Big Ten or the Big Ten championship. So. All right. So again, guys, you are listening to the I'm going to say the Notre Dame post-game show. We're talking more college football playoff than the Notre Dame Stanford game. Again, my name is Nathan Erbach. I'm the host of the Golden Homers podcast, and I do this weekly show post-game wise for Mark Rogers here at the Voice of College Football. I'm sure Mark is going to be coming on soon for you guys on his main channel. And again, before some of you leave, this is the Notre Dame channel, but also I'm live on the main channel as well, talking to you guys. But the other teams, I'm not exactly sure how many teams Mark has at this point, but I know several college football teams have their own post game show here with Mark. So stay on with us, and we'll keep going through this. Seen some other comments rolling in about maybe Notre Dame not getting in. Not saying they will get in, Mike. Certainly not inconceivable. I mean, right now, if Alabama were to lose next week against Georgia, there's an argument to be made that the Notre Dame would be number 4 right there. Especially if Baylor were to beat Oklahoma State next week, then I think you're looking at Notre Dame probably in for sure at that point. So it's not inconceivable. Not saying it's going to happen. I would say it's probably 50-50 or more odds at this point. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, this is a year that's been kind of crazy in regards to just everybody being somewhat equal. Everybody's showing a lot of weaknesses and strengths outside of Georgia for the most part. I do think Georgia maybe could show some weaknesses here in the college football playoff with their offense. But I think that's been trending up. Obviously Brock Bowers is a terrific player for them. Getting George Pickens back. I think it was last week they got him back, or correct me if I'm wrong. It might've been this week. I forgot when I read that. I didn't watch their game against Georgia Tech. But that's certainly a big name player for them, getting him back. So their offense will probably continue to flow into the college football playoff and of course the championship this week against Alabama. But I do think that there are some matchup problems when they play some better defenses. And I don't think that they played a terrific schedule this year. They're in the weaker part of the SEC, but that's neither here or there. They've blown out everybody they've played and they deserve their spot. And they're the only team that's really not shown any weaknesses. Obviously, Notre Dame with the loss to Cincinnati, a couple of the early games this season not showing out maybe how they wanted to. That's certainly where their weaknesses lie. I think quarterback position is still somewhat of a question mark, especially if Jack Cohn doesn't get protection. But that offense is certainly trending up as well. Cincinnati, the biggest thing for them is maybe the last couple weeks not showing out the way they maybe wanted to. Had a really good game against SMU. I should give them credit for that. But, against Navy, they struggled. Against, I think it was East Carolina this week. They didn't look great. And they've had a few other kind of, just meh games, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then obviously being a group of 5 team, that certainly hurts them a little bit. So, but that again is with some of these other teams like Alabama having 1 loss, possibly 2 losses, Ohio State now having 2 losses, the Big 12 not having an undefeated team, the Pac-12 being down, and Oregon, suffering their second loss last year. That's where a team like Cincinnati is able to maybe sneak in. And again, that's how Notre Dame, after their weak start to the season, has been able to sort of trend up into this spot where now they have some hope. So, yeah. And again, Tony, just echoing what I've pretty much said here. Exactly. It's been that kind of year. And if there's not even necessarily some upsets next week, if there's just, again, Georgia beats Bama, a few other things maybe happen. Notre Dame's in for sure, probably, if one more thing happens outside of Georgia winning. And if they could still possibly be in, even if Georgia does end up winning that game and nothing else crazy happens. So, and yeah, absolutely, D-Rock. That's sort of it, just kind of talking a little bit of Notre Dame more than anything, just because this is a Notre Dame channel and stuff like that. But that's sort of where Notre Dame's at this year. I mean, everybody kind of said that they sucked and they weren't going to, it was a rebuilding year, maybe not sucked, but, certainly after the first few weeks, it wasn't trending, 100% the way people wanted. But, 11-1, 10-2, maybe is kind of where their floor is at this point. And that's a really nice place to be. I think they've won 10 games every year since their 2016 debacle. And Notre Dame, they showed a graphic during the game today, and now Brian Kelly has 7 10-win seasons in his tenure at Notre Dame, and a lot of those are obviously consecutively since 2017. So they're certainly trending up. Just has a really good football team. And again, there's maybe a lack of parity in college football overall with Bama, Georgia, Clemson, teams like that kind of dominating the college recruiting. But Notre Dame, when you really think about it, it's right there. They're not on that level, but they're probably a top 5 to 10 team. I don't think that's super arguable at this point. I mean, they recruit at a high level compared to most programs. And right now they're winning at a level that most programs aren't able to do on a consistent basis, unless you're talking about the teams that I mentioned, Ohio State, Georgia, Bama, Clemson most years. I mean, they're having obviously a down season right now. So, but outside of those programs, Notre Dame's right there, and they deserve what they've gotten over the last few years, whether that means it's a route in the college football playoff or possibly, again, not making it this year because of some other stuff. So, D-Rock, don't know if there's trolls. I don't know. A lot of you guys can't see the comments rolling, and I haven't put them on here, but I wouldn't call them trolls, D-Rock. People want to say it's arguable. I personally don't agree. In regards to, the Notre Dame, the program right now. I think it's as healthy as it's been since, the Lou Holtz days. I mean, obviously they haven't won a national championship. They have yet to win that big game. Maybe you can include Clemson in that, but they haven't won at the end of the year in the big game. But, right now, outside of the top 3 or 4 teams, there's not a lot of argument that Notre Dame's right there. And I think that shows in the record that they're putting up on a decent, or on a yearly basis. Here's a good one. More Buchner. I mean, I agree. I mean, it's going to be his program next year. Only thing I would say is the offense right now does look a little bit more crisp, and it moves the ball more effectively and more often when Cone is in the game, especially when he has protection. And I think that's the most important thing. When Cone has protection, he's fine. He threw the pick today. He threw a couple balls today, actually, where, and I guess I want to address this first. Early on in the first half, he was throwing some tight window balls and completing them. And when you're completing them, they look great. You're happy. The receivers are catching, are catching them in traffic, and the ball's coming out crisp. He wasn't, floating them like he maybe was earlier on in the season or at times, just throughout, each game. The ball just looked really nice coming out of his hands. And in the second half, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and assume that Stanford, kind of went to the locker room in the second half. I'm obviously down 24-0. So we're not talking about a close game here either, which I think is important intel when it comes to that kind of stuff. But he threw a tight ball to Mayer when he probably wasn't open, and the Stanford DB made a really nice play. I can live with that a little bit with Cone, more so than some of the throws and the sacks he was taking at the beginning of the season. He didn't do that a lot today. Now that the offensive line is significantly improved, from the first couple weeks of the year. Again, I can live with Cone. What I would like to see a little bit more of than we have over the last several weeks is Buchner mixed in as a part of the actual offense and not just the second string guy that comes in, and runs the second half in a blowout or the last couple drives of a game. And that's exactly what's happened against specifically Georgia Tech and this week against Stanford. Early on in the season, I thought there was a lot of, Pine would come in at times to spell Cohen when he was struggling or when the offensive line wouldn't give him help. And Buchner would come in for similar reasons, but then they wouldn't run the entire offense with him because they didn't trust his arm. Now, as the season's gone on, his arm has been more effective. The offense has been more effective with Buchner, and not more than Cohen, but just more effective than it was early in the season with Buchner, to clarify. And I'd like to see some drives where Buchner is either sprinkled in, or you see Buchner for a drive and then you go back to Cohen, because I think there are times where you play this up-tempo offense with Cohen, the defense gets tired, you can bring Buchner in, and then he can run it like he did against Stanford today and maybe have open field for 33 yards. So, again, dropping dimes, not necessarily disagreeing with you. I would like to see more Buchner, but not necessarily all Buchner this year, because I do think Cohen is an important part of this offense overall. Kind of going through some more questions for you. Mike, appreciate you for coming on. No reason to really get into that too much. I argue enough with friends in regards to Notre Dame sucking. They don't suck. They're not Alabama. They're not Georgia on a consistent basis or something like that. Albeit Georgia not winning the national championship in a long time as well. But they certainly don't suck as a program. There's a lot to be said that they are not a bad program. Quite the contrary, actually. So it's going to keep going through these comments for you guys. See what you guys have been saying here over the last, my last Tyler Buchner rant. Let's see here. Indy isn't jumping Cincy due to the head-to-head. Yeah. No, I mean, I hope you're still on here, Scoop John or One Scoop John. I kind of discussed this earlier. I don't know if you were on when I said it, but I don't disagree. That my argument's always been head-to-head and overall record are hugely important. But at the same time, I would not necessarily be surprised if Cincinnati struggled against Houston. Obviously, they've been struggling over the last several weeks, kind of just, more for their standards. I'd just say minus the SMU game. But if they struggled against Houston with the way Notre Dame's been playing, I don't know. I wouldn't put it 100% past the committee to make that decision. But I will say, as a Notre Dame fan, as a Notre Dame analyst, I would disagree with that. I do not think a undefeated Cincinnati team should drop below Notre Dame. But the committee does weird things on a weekly basis, and again, would not be surprised if it happened. And again, like I said, I would disagree overall. I don't know if this is. I know some of you guys are arguing on here, but yeah, it's funny. If I were to pick a team to win the national championship, at least from a favoritism standpoint, outside of Notre Dame, I'd be rooting for Georgia. I mean, the fact that they haven't won one in a while. My brother-in-law is actually a Georgia fan as well, so keep it in the family. That wouldn't bother me. And I'm just kind of glad that this year looks like there's going to be some new blood. Or some fresh blood in there too. I mean, Michigan's never made the playoff. Cincinnati's never made the playoff. Those are two teams that if they win next week, they're in. Georgia's never won, the college football playoff. They haven't won a national championship in a long time, just like Notre Dame hasn't. So if they won, even though they've been dominant this year, that'd be great. I think that'd be great for college football. Some of you might disagree because they're SEC. So the argument is the best SEC team still won it. I hear that. I mean, you might want to see a Pac-12 team, win it one year, or Oklahoma or something like that win it one year prior to them moving to the SEC as well. Notre Dame obviously winning it would probably piss off some people because of their brand, but also make people happy in the same with kind of the same thought process that at least it's not Alabama or something like that. But I would say for this year, I mean, fresh blood is nice. And I think that, a new team is going to win it unless Alabama were to beat, Georgia next week and then somehow they end up winning the national championship. Then that'd be, I think, really the only scenario where someone new doesn't win it this year. So I think that's the main takeaway, at least in my opinion. It's nice to see that, maybe some more parity is starting to come into the college football world. And yeah, Johnny, that's kind of what I was talking about with, just with with that rant for Notre Dame in regards to Cincinnati. I mean, do I think Notre Dame's a better team than Cincinnati? I do. I know they lost to them earlier in the season. I do think if there was a rematch in the college football playoff, Notre Dame would not only be favored, but probably win that game. Obviously, the revenge factor is huge there. But I think they're just playing a better quality and a better brand of football than they were than when they played Cincinnati the first time. But at the same time, I do think head-to-head and stuff like that matters. And that's just one of those things where Cincinnati deserves to be in for sure, and deserves to be in over Notre Dame, I guess is what I'm really getting at. Chris, thanks for entering the chat. It was a good topic of discussion. I was just actually discussing this with some buddies of mine earlier, with the whole talk of them moving into a 12-team playoff. Do I think a 12-team playoff would be fun as hell? I do. I think it would be, you wouldn't necessarily have these last few weeks that we're having where it's like, okay, this Michigan-Ohio State game wouldn't have mattered much if, at least they both make the college football playoff. I mean, the seeding wise and stuff like that would be something, but from a, making the college football playoff, it wouldn't have the effect that it did today. Same with the Oklahoma State game. It's a very similar outcome, but one team wins, they probably both still make the college football playoff. So from that standpoint, I agree. It takes, it certainly takes that away from us, where every game matters. But at the same time, at the beginning of the season, you start giving a lot of teams, hope that they can make it. And then at the end of the year, you have this really, really cool tournament where where it's like 6 games to start out or whatever the bye weeks are. I'm not exactly sure of the semantics that they were going to bring into it, but then you start seeing some upsets. You see maybe the 12 team beat, whatever team they're playing first. I'm sure I'm sure there's some bye weeks involved. Because again, I think outside of these, like a couple elite teams on a yearly basis this year, maybe not included outside of Georgia, there is so much parity in college football that, the 5th best team in college football is probably not much better than the 12th best team in college football. And I would say that if you were to go back on a yearly basis, that's probably fairly accurate. And then, of course, obviously, as a Notre Dame fan, Notre Dame would probably make the the college football playoff every year, or at least damn near every year. And I wouldn't be sweating the last week of the season. And again, I do actually appreciate the fact that Notre Dame is willing to not have a bye. Now that I'm kind of ranting, I kind of remember the talk about it early on in the season when they did have a 12-team playoff, up for debate. Notre Dame essentially said that they wouldn't take one of the first 4 slots, and at the very best that they would be, top 5 or the 5th slot. And then you have that argument where that's essentially their quote unquote 13th game. Or 13th data point. So I do enjoy the thought of, what we have right now, but also expanding that to, maybe some different heights. And again, Chris, that's another good point. I mean, kind of going off what you're saying, it doesn't, again, I don't know. If a 12 team won if a 12 team or the 12 seed won the national championship, then the argument there is that it's not really a Cinderella. I don't think it's basketball. I don't think it's FCS football. I don't think it's, baseball where a lot of teams make it in college, in the college ranks. And, maybe a team that people don't think about wins it. We all know the college football playoff and how it works. When we have 4 teams get blown out. What I think it will do, and if I to kind of further my point a little bit, what I think it will do is I think it will put 5 through 12 in a better order to face those top 4 teams, because there is a lot of parity outside of really those couple elite teams on a yearly basis. So you see 5 through 12, maybe that's where Cincinnati really proves themselves and they beat maybe a couple Power 5 teams on the way to, to losing to an Alabama or a Georgia in the end, but it proves that maybe they belonged in that top 4. So again, no system's going to be perfect, but I think a playoff system would allow essentially the top 4 to really be proven by season's end. So from that standpoint, I enjoy it, because I think if you look at the top 4 every year, I think the committee for the most part has gotten it right from a resume standpoint, but it doesn't always bring to light who actually the best teams are every year. And so if you're like, again, let's say Notre Dame's playing, Michigan one year, and Notre Dame's 11-1, lost to a pretty good team. Michigan lost to Ohio State, but dominated their schedule in general. You're gonna prove who the best team is out of those 2 teams versus one of them making it and one of them not, possibly. So that's really why I like it overall. But I see you guys are kind of talking about it a little bit. Mike's still trolling in the chat. So, but thanks again, guys. I appreciate your comments. It's one of the better ones we've had, probably because I was able to get this rolling before the game ended, and some of you thought I was Mark, but I appreciate you guys staying on and kicking it with me here for a few minutes before I wrap it up for the night. John, and again, I don't know if this is where I'm saying I see it both ways. I enjoy chaos. I enjoy the idea of having a 12-team playoff and figuring it out from there. But I also like I said, I also do agree that the college football playoff committee has gotten it correct, at least from a resume standpoint, every year. I don't think that's for me, it's not arguable. I'm sure it's arguable for others. I know Ohio State's missed it a few years when people thought they deserved it. I'm sure there's been some other, and I'm sure that there's some Notre Dame haters in here that don't believe that Notre Dame should have made it over the past couple of years and are probably tired of them getting blown out in big games. So a lot of that's neither here or there. I just think that the college football playoff, from a resume standpoint, has gotten it right most of the year. So from that standpoint, keeping it a 14 playoff doesn't bother me. Not only that, but it makes these last few weeks, really, really crazy, as we're seeing over the last few weeks right now. We don't really know what's going to happen until next week is over. And that's fun. It's not, it's not fun if at the beginning of the season we're saying, hey, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Oklahoma are making the college football playoff, and they all go 12-0. It's not fun when we don't have any action like that. And then on the flip side of things, you add the extra, couple games for some teams, and I think that's where you're going to see, at least some fun in a meaningful way. And you see some teams face each other that maybe don't usually face each other. And again, in a meaningful bowl game versus having it be a thing where players sit out. And I think that's actually probably another good point. If you're the 12 seed, most years you're probably playing in a New Year's Six bowl, and you're going to have, maybe 3 or 4 of your best players sit out because they're going to the draft. If you're the 12 seed and you're playing the 5 seed in the college football playoff, that's not happening. So you're seeing the cream of the crop play each other, which is nice. Maybe there's some argument to be made that they don't want to, some people just still don't want to see those injuries. They want to see those guys in the college, in the NFL. But as a college football fan, I want to see Kyle Hamilton this year, for example, for Notre Dame. I don't want to see Kyle Hamilton sit out the Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State because it doesn't mean anything. I want to see Kyle Hamilton play in the college football playoff because it means something to him, and he ends up playing. So that's a good example just from a Notre Dame standpoint for a kid who, probably sits out the bowl game for Notre Dame this year if they're not in the college football playoff. All right, guys. Yeah, no, and Tony, that's a good point. And this is kind of an argument I've been in with some SEC fans in the past. I have some friends of mine that are SEC fans. I said my brother-in-law is a big Georgia fan. He no one wants change if the change for your team is what's going to be the factor. If Bama fans don't want to see a 12-team playoff because they don't care, they make it most years. Same with Ohio State, Clemson, and those types of fans. Though I guess you could argue that Ohio State's probably been Ohio State probably has the biggest argument for being snubbed a couple of years. And this year they're probably a team that could get hot at the right time and win it. So maybe Ohio State would be pushing for a 12-team playoff because most years they're going to be in the top 4 anyway, get that bye, and then go on from there. So I don't know. Again, it's an imperfect system, but it's one that I think can be improved from 4. And again, maybe it's not 12 teams, maybe it should be 8 or something like that. But and Chris, that's another thing. I agree, and I think that's why the expansion of the playoff doesn't really have to do with the top teams. It has to do with separating maybe some of the teams that are better than, I don't know, like for example, Notre Dame the last couple of years. I can be unbiased here and say this: were they the most talented team in the top? Were they one of the top 4 most talented teams every year? Maybe not. Maybe they in a top 12 matchup they lose their first round, and we're not talking about Notre Dame getting blown out by Georgia or Alabama, or Clemson in the college football playoff. So I think it's more about getting maybe the 4 100% correct, because there's so much parity outside of the top, out of the top 3 or 4. So. And Mike, I don't know if you're trying to troll or not. I know you mentioned Notre Dame getting blown out by Bama, but in reality, you're 100% correct. I mean, last year no one was going to beat Alabama. I thought Notre Dame played them tough, but that was pretty much the only way they played them as tough as any team was going to play them, essentially. And so I think that kind of proved that they were worthy of making it. But Alabama was just that good. This year, if Notre Dame and Alabama played, it might be a different story. So, overall, and this is kind of to another point. I think it was Chris that made it. I think the best team usually does win it, but again, it's not really about the best team right now. The argument is more about the, getting the 2 or 3 or 4 correct, that aren't the best team, that maybe could end up beating the team that people say is the best team, if that makes any sense. So hopefully you're sticking with me in regards to what that means. So, but all right, guys, it looks like most of you are just kind of talking amongst yourselves and stuff like that. And the questions are a little few and far between at this point. We've been going for about 45 minutes. So again, I appreciate you for hopping on. I know some of you aren't Notre Dame fans, so again, thanks for sticking around regardless. If you wanted to hear the Notre Dame Stanford talk or the Notre Dame talk in general, good luck to your guys' teams next week and their bowl games, and obviously if they're in the college football playoff, hopefully wish your teams luck. I hope Notre Dame gets in, just like hopefully some of you think that as well. And we'll see that there's going to be a lot of chaos. I think that happens over the next week or so. I think there's going to be a few upsets here and there, or at least 1 or 2. And it should be fun. And then we'll go from there. So, again, guys, thanks for joining the Notre Dame postgame show. You're here listening to Mark Rogers, or at Mark Rogers TV, at the Voice of College Football. And again, I'm here with you every week. And we'll see you after the next Notre Dame game. See you guys.